Chapter 29. The Temple of the Pillars. Everyone found Fatty's claim on the Jade Eye perplexing. How could it possibly belong to him just because he said so? Internally, I worried. If these archaeologists realize we're actually tomb raiders, that would be disastrous. With a sense of urgency, I nudged Fatty. Cut the nonsense. Even if you say less, no one's going to think you're mute. Realizing he misspoke, Fatty silenced himself. Luckily, with the darkness inside the temple and everyone wearing dual-filter gas masks, facial expressions were concealed, sparing us from further embarrassment. Professor Chin and his students, all being academics, didn't concern me as much as Shirley Yang did. Her intelligence and quick responses were far superior. If she suspected Fatty and me to be grave robbers, our cover would be blown. Nevertheless, what was done, and there was no point in worrying. So I assisted Fatty in fitting his jade amulet into the Jade Eye. The Jade Eye's iris seemed to face upwards towards the ceiling, and its socket above appeared to match Fatty's jade precisely. After adjusting the eye's orientation several times, it clicked into the correct position with a snapping sound. The Jade Eye then rolled away from its fixed spot on the floor, leaving a bare space. How or what mechanism had held it in place was baffling. I picked up the dislodged Jade Eye and handed it to Professor Chen for examination. Shirley Yang illuminated it with a glowing stick, allowing for a clearer view. The professor examined the artifact with his magnifying glass, turning it this way and that, shaking his head. This? I can't quite determine its purpose. This Jade Eye is as large as a human head, absolutely natural in form. I'd even venture to say that such work couldn't have been crafted by human hands 2,000 years ago. The civilization of Jingjue was mysterious, and Professor Chen and his peers, despite decades of dedication, had only garnered minimal information and rudimentary understanding of the Ghost Cave script and history. It was only after arriving at the Black Tower that they conjectured the culture's veneration of eyes as spiritual totems, a realization unable to explain the enigmatic nature of the Jade Eye. What was certain was that this great hall, supported by 16 towering stone pillars, served as a temple. Considering Jingjue revered eyes as the highest source of energy, it made sense for a temple to enshrine an eyeball. However, why the Jade Eye featured a socket that perfectly fit Fatty's heirloom, and why installing it would cause the eye to detach from its previously fixed position, were mysteries that remained unsolved. Professor Chun insisted that Fatty recount the origin of his jade amulet in full detail without any concealment or exaggeration, urging him to stick strictly to the facts. Fatty, who had become accustomed to boasting and exaggerating over the years as a self-employed businessman, had a habit of stretching the truth, especially before coming to Xinjiang when he told the professor and others that he had acquired the jade while fighting bandits there. At the time, no one took his story seriously. They found it amusing and were only truly intrigued by the mysterious Ghost Cave script on the jade. It was this intrigue that led to his inclusion in the archaeological team. Now, under serious questioning, Fatty had no choice but to be honest. He admitted that his knowledge about the jade's provenance was quite limited and proceeded to tell the whole truth. Fatty's father had joined the revolution during the Huma Rebellion at the age of 15, and one of his comrades, who later became a high-ranking commander during the later stages of the Liberation War, had taken a different path. One was in the 1st Field Army, and the other in the 3rd. Fatty's father's comrade, while leading a troop through the southwestern edges of the Taklamakan Desert near Naya, encountered a group of over 100 bandits. The situation in Xinjiang at the time was complex, with numerous armed wanderers, bandits, horse thieves, and the like. So confrontations with the Liberation Army were frequent. In a brief but fierce clash, the commander's guard troop decisively defeated the bandits, finding the jade amulet on the body of a dead bandit chief with a dark beard. The origins and purpose of the jade amulet were unknown to the troops. Apart from its unusual color and texture and some odd symbols carved into it, it didn't seem particularly extraordinary at the time and was not considered valuable. Later, the commander, hearing that his old comrade had fathered a boy, sent the casually acquired jade as a gift to the child Fatty. Subsequent to the reverse flows they both experienced during political upheavals, Fatty's parents passed away, as did the commander from Xinjiang. At that time, Fatty was only in his mid-teens, not fully understanding the situation, and all that was left of his family's legacy was this piece of ancient jade. He treasured it as a relic, and that was all he knew about the jade's history. After listening to Fatty's story, Professor Chen sighed. It's a pity that those people are no longer with us, and this exquisite piece of Jingjue jade has changed hands several times, making its origins impossible to trace. He expressed his profound regret at not being able to uncover the mysteries of the jade eye. Shirley Young took the jade eye from the professor to examine it closely, lost in concentration. From the moment she entered Jingjue, she had been exceptionally quiet, likely worried because the ruins revealed no trace of her father. The group of explorers, including her father, had been missing for over a year, and it was difficult to say whether they ever reached this place. Considering the location near the mountain pass with frequent fierce sandstorms burying the city repeatedly throughout the year, only for it to be uncovered again by subsequent winds, we were extremely fortunate to have found it at all. In this vast desert, locating a small expedition team is as challenging as finding a needle at the bottom of the sea. Without seeing their bodies, she would not find peace. The deeper we ventured into the ruins of Jingjue, the more intense her sense of loss seemed to become. Once, she had saved my life in the valley, and I hoped to have the opportunity to do something for her. Seeing her interest in the jade eye, I thought it was a pity it belonged to Fatty. If it were mine, I wouldn't mind giving it to her. Before Shirley Young had finished examining it, Fatty, already reluctant to part with the jade eye, reached for it. Shirley Young pulled her hand back, clutching the eye, and said to Fatty, "What's the rush? I will return it to you when I'm done examining it." Fatty retorted, "Cut the talk. This jade is from my family's possession. Do we have to wait for a foreigner to be satisfied? I'm afraid you won't be able to look away." Seeing that situation escalate, I quickly intervened. "Don't fight, both of you. Show some respect for me as the team leader." I decided to let Miss Young have it for 5 more minutes. I intended to avoid a potential quarrel that might damage the jade eye. However, as I reached out to steady their hands holding the jade eye, both released their grip upon seeing my intervention, only managing to hold the eye from the top with one hand. The large, slippery sphere was difficult to grasp and, to my horror, the jade eye fell heavily to the ground and, with an audible crack, shattered into 8 pieces. Everyone was dumbfounded, Professor Chin's entire body trembling as he pointed at me, unable to articulate his aggravation. I was at a loss for words, my hands shaking as I protested. "I didn't mean to. I thought. I was just trying to help. How could I know it would break so easily?" As I spoke, I reached to gather the scattered jade fragments, internally praying for a miracle that they could somehow be restored. If they demanded compensation for this priceless artifact, I knew I would never be able to afford it, even if they sold me in pieces. In my panic, I couldn't remember whom I was praying to: Allah, God, Chairman Mao, or Buddha. Perhaps it was my lack of a firm belief that rendered the prayers ineffective. The jade eye was heavy, and the stone floor unforgiving, some pieces having shattered completely. I scrapped around on the ground but failed to find every fragment. Fatty eventually remarked, "That's enough, old Hu. It's broken. There's no use collecting it," as he reached to pull me up from the ground. I'd been crouching too long, anxious, with the weight of the equipment in my backpack adding to my burden. Fatty's tug sent me off balance, and I ended up sitting on the ground. Struggling to get up, I inadvertently looked up and saw an eye as big as a wash basin in the temple ceiling, emitting a strange light and staring down at us. Upon entering, we had only briefly glimpsed our surroundings, not noticing when this giant, moving eyeball above had appeared. I hastily shone my flashlight upward, expecting to illuminate the roof. Unexpectedly, the light seemed to be swallowed by darkness, except where it caressed the large, veiny eyeball. The rest of the ceiling remained enshrouded in darkness. The rest of the group also noticed the enormous, peculiar eye overhead and, fearing it might fall and harm us, instinctively stepped back. Then, as if in response, the huge eye rolled about before settling on the ground. Now clear to us, it wasn't exactly an eyeball but rather a semi-transparent orb, its outer layer a pale greenish-white material enclosing a large mass of something dark. Its appearance was unnerving, easily mistaken for an eye at first glance. Fatty, startled by this bizarre orb, readied his assault rifle to shoot. I quickly grabbed his arm to prevent any hasty actions. Before we could make sense of what it was, the huge, eye-like orb suddenly split open, releasing hundreds of intertwined black snakes, identical to those we had encountered in the Zaglama Mountains, with black scales and lumps on their heads suggestive of eyes. These writhing snakes, covered in a sticky, transparent substance, seemed freshly hatched and were viscerally repulsive, causing an involuntary shudder among us as we instinctively retreated further. We had seen a statue of a human-headed, serpent-bodied guardian deity in the Black Tower, its head also adorned with a similar black sphere. Professor Chen had guessed it represented an eye, and recalling how Shirley Yang had used her camera's flash to save my life in the valley, it appeared these creatures were particularly sensitive to light, regardless of whether those head lumps were actual eyes. The episode in the valley had left a profound impression on us. These mysterious snakes, with their robust bodies, could launch themselves into the air and fly several meters. Their venom was fiercely potent, ensuring death if one got bitten, as there was no time for rescue. Without delay, I took the front with Fatty, seizing the opportunity while the black snakes were still entangled and not yet dispersed to shoot at them. Their vitality was formidable. Even with just a head remaining, they could still cause harm. As I fired, I called out to Chujian to pour solid fuel onto them and set them ablaze, burning them to a crisp. The flames illuminated the temple, adorned with huge stone pillars, and the hundreds of black snakes did not even have a chance to bare their venomous fangs before being burned to ashes. I breathed a sigh of relief, thankful for our swift action. Was the appearance of these black snakes somehow connected to the shattering of the Jade Eye? Could the Jade Eye have been a sacrificial artifact, and fitting the piece of ancient jade into it completed a ritual to summon these snakes from some sort of hyperspace? Whatever the case, we would need to be extremely cautious should we ever encounter such Jade Eyes again. I urged everyone to inspect the surroundings thoroughly to make sure there were no stragglers. Carefully looking over the roof, all we saw were smooth stone tiles, puzzling us as to where those snake-like eyeballs could have originated from. Our detailed examination uncovered something unusual. The temple housed 16 giant stone pillars, each column adorned with patterns of 6 eyes. The pedestals were hexagonal, with each side etched with a unique symbol. Hungry ghosts, sheep heads, foreign people, giant-eyed figures, guardian beasts, and one side that was left blank. These pillars captured our attention, and Professor Chun took note of the symbols and their directions, suggesting that we try rotating the hexagonal bases beneath the pillars. To our surprise, the bases, which were separate from the bodies of the pillars, could indeed be turned. The professor confirmed that this structure, filled with large stone pillars, was a ritual temple and served multiple purposes. The symbols at the base of the pillars indicated their functions. The pillars, grouped in 4s, currently formed a pattern with the guardian beast symbols opposite each other. Perhaps the Jade Eye was part of the sacrificial ceremony, and Fatty's ancient jade was a key instrument to initiate the ritual. It was possible there were other artifacts at play. As for how such instruments ended up outside the temple, their stories lost to time. Perhaps plundered by tomb raiders or stolen by slaves revolting against Jingjue's queen. It was a mystery likely to remain unsolved. It could be surmised that once the ritual device was activated, it summoned what were regarded as guardian deity snakes to partake in the offerings. Thus, this multifunctional temple, replete with symbols of protector deities and figures representing the lowest social tiers such as slaves, animals, and evil spirits, may have also been used to conduct rituals to suppress malign spirits or punish slaves. The arrangement of the symbols beneath the pillars indicated the focal entities for the rituals. Shirley Young posed a question, "Professor, this temple must be as significant as the royal palace. Could there be a hidden passage here leading to the underground palace? Should we look around, especially since we urgently need to find the underground watercourse for Ye's sake?" Professor Chin replied, "I can assure you, there indeed exists such a passage. However, given the size of this temple and the covert nature of these passageways, it might take us quite some time to find one." Fatty interjected, "Esteemed academics, as the saying goes, once you've accepted someone's coin, it's your job to solve their problems. You probably don't know yet what old Hu and I are capable of. We've got plenty of Soviet explosives right here. Why don't the rest of you take a break outside and let me blast a tunnel open? I'll show you what we can do. The professor immediately waved off the suggestion. Absolutely not. These ruins are remnants of an ancient civilization. Damaging even a single brick is a crime. Considering my recent blunder of breaking that precious jade eye, I thought it was a chance to redeem myself. After all, the geography and feng shui of the world were well understood by me. Finding a hidden passage should pose no difficulty. So, I proposed, the arrangement of these 16 stone pillars in the temple seems to mirror the configuration of the passing through 16 dragons I've seen in ancient tombs, resembling the intricate mechanisms from the Han Dynasty. Observing the layout and topography of this ancient city from the Black Tower, it's evident that this site has been chosen for its strategical terrain advantage. The Jingjue Queen must have been a master of mysticism. Allow me to try using the technique of divining for golden nodes to locate a passage within the temple. I'm still a novice with this method, so if I'm unsuccessful, we'll consider other options. Upon hearing my proposal, everyone agreed and stood by to watch. I stepped into the center of the temple and observed the stone pillars around me. The arrangement of these passing through 16 dragons' pillars based on the variations of the 5 elements and the 24 directions isn't overly complicated. It's merely adapted slightly depending on the setting. Walking repeatedly between the pillars, I mentally calculated their significance. The 16 dragons mentioned in the 16 characters feng shui secret technique are in fact symbolic of snakes, and among these, only one that penetrates the Earth's energy veins is the true dragon. Although it sounds straightforward, the practical application is quite mentally demanding. Eventually, I focused my attention on 4 of the temple's flagstones deep within. I tapped on each with a small geological hammer, finding 3 solid while one emitted a hollow echo, indicative of an empty space beneath. This 2-meter square stone tile was unmarked by the wear of frequent movement, suggesting that the passage beneath was rarely used. Aside from using explosives, it was unlikely to be pried open by hand. The nearest pillar contained the lever to the passageway. Whether the mechanism still worked was unknown. Calling over Fatty to assist, I placed my hand on the hexagonal stone groove below the pillar. Turning it incorrectly could activate a trap, so I advised Professor Chen and the others to step outside the temple. Wiping the sweat from my brow, I instructed Fatty to align the empty side of the hexagonal base with the flagstone that might conceal the hidden path. Then, we needed to turn it clockwise for 5 notches, counterclockwise for 1 notch, clockwise again for 11 notches, and finally, counterclockwise for 2 notches. No more, no less, as any mistake could have dire consequences. Fatty responded with a hint of humor and pride. Old Hu, do you think I can't count? Back in school, my grades were way better than yours. Stop babbling and let's do this. With a shared understanding of the grave importance and potential danger of their task, the 2 men prepared to operate the ancient mechanism that could reveal secrets untouched by time. With the incantation of the secret technique in mind, seek the dragon across 1,000 miles, explore around 5 steps with the yang, complemented by one of Yin, begin the turning. We both put our strength into rotating the stone groove, counting out loud with each turn. After the final rotation, and with a series of clanking sounds, the flagstone sank into the ground, revealing a deep, seemingly bottomless passage.